Hey, everybody. Welcome to DouglasNow.com's Beyond the Front Page. I'm Robert Preston Jr., and we've got several interesting stories to go over here during this edition. We had a couple of stories break late last week regarding some crime and punishment, and these were pretty significant stories and generated quite a bit of comments on our Facebook page. And of course, if you would like to go review those comments, please visit the DouglasNow.com Facebook page and scroll down. We've had several stories posted since then, but if you scroll on down, you will be able to find these stories pretty easily, I believe. One story that has been really big, it's been ongoing for about the last year and a half, has been Operation Sandy Bottom. Now, if you've been following what we've done on Douglas Now, you are familiar with that. Sandy Bottom was a significant roundup of drug traffickers, alleged drug traffickers, of course, in Coffee County, Bacon County, and several other surrounding areas. Got nearly 50 defendants on a variety of charges. Some were guards in prisons in the area, um, and the charges varied, depending upon their involvement with the organization, but it was a rather loose conglomeration of a drug network working together, and it really put a dent in the drug trade here in our area. And every time we mention Sandy Bottom, people ask, want to know, what was Operation Sandy Bottom? And again, it was a significant drug trafficker roundup, alleged drug trafficker roundup, took place in January of 2021, I believe it was. So about a year and a half later, and most of the defendants in that case have pled guilty. None have opted to go to trial, except for these last few. There's probably about six more, I think, around that number that have opted to go to trial. More than likely, they're going to end up pleading out. Not expecting very many, if any of them, to actually go to trial. But we had six more who pled guilty and were sentenced last week. Those individuals were Richard Young, Nathan Irving, Anthony Killebrew, Alfonso Bruton, Reggie Johnson, and Ellis Lowe Jr. Now, the exact amount of prison time that these guys got will vary, again, depending on their level of involvement, their willingness to work, and exactly what they were accused of doing. But again, they all pled guilty, so they admitted to their involvement in this drug trafficking operation. The shortest amount of time any of these six received was Richard Young. He was arrested in December 2019 on other charges, indicted in Sandy Bottom. He was sentenced to time served. So he's been in jail since 2019. So when he pled guilty and received his sentence, he was released from jail. The longest sentence was Alfonso Bruton. He got 120 months. So that's 10 years in prison. And there is no parole. This is going to come up again in a few minutes. There is no parole in the federal system. So these individuals who were sentenced to prison, and 5 out of the 6 were, again, Richard Young sentenced to time served, but the other 5 all received prison sentences from a little over 2 years to upwards of 10 years. In the case of Mr. Bruton, they will serve all of that time. And then there's some other things with supervised release and fines and what have you that are also involved in the sentencing. But for the most part, it was pretty significant prison time for everyone involved. And the reason this is kind of interesting, a lot of people ask, they want to know, where did Operation Sandy Bottom come from? Well, those of you who are familiar with Douglas and Coffee County know the Oak Park area in Coffee County is also known as the Sand Ridge. And because that area is known as the Sand Ridge and has historically, at least through much of my lifetime, been one of the areas known for a higher than normal crime rate, the feds thought that Sandy Bottom and Sand Ridge sounded pretty good together. So in this day and age when we have to name everything, and most of these federal operations do have some type of name related to the area or the individuals who are targets in these investigations. In this case, because a lot of the folks from Coffee County lived in the Oak Park area, commonly known as the Sand Ridge, the feds thought it would be nice to name it Sandy Bottom. So Operation Sandy Bottom is ongoing. And when I say that we got a significant number of drug traffickers a significant number of significant drug traffickers, we can't overstate that. This was a tremendous operation, one that the feds were very proud of, one that involved a number of organizations and agencies, not just here in Coffee County, but beyond. Uh, FBI involved, GBI, a lot of other local agencies came together to assist with this operation, and it put a dent in the drug trade. It really did. It put a dent in the drug trade. We're always asking when we see drug bust and we see a lot of street level bust, why don't we get the big guys? Why don't we get the ones who are really controlling the supply and moving the pieces around with our local drug trade? Sandy Bottom did that. Sandy Bottom did that and put these guys away for a long time. Now, it doesn't take long for others to move in, but we saw a drop, particularly right after Sandy Bottom. That was a very significant operation and a significant show of force by the agencies involved. It did a tremendous amount of good in our community, and you're going to continue to hear about Sandy Bottom. If you have any more specific questions about exactly what it was and who got rounded up in that, we have press release after press release after press release on our DouglasNow.com website. Feel free to go back and look in those archives. I think you'll find it pretty interesting. But you take out close to 50 accused drug dealers in such a small area. And again, it did get outside of Coffee County, but still we're dealing with a relatively small area. It was a pretty big blow to the drug trade. And I tip my hat to our officers who participated and who assisted and who got these folks off the streets. One other thing, we kind of touched on this last week, one thing to keep in mind when you read these charges and read about these defendants is there wasn't a lot there weren't a lot of drugs that were apprehended is not the right word, that were found during this operation. It didn't really get a lot of drugs off the streets. What it did was it got people off the streets. It got those individuals who are heavily involved in the drug trade off the streets. There was a little bit, they got some guns, got some drugs, small amounts, relatively small amounts compared to the number of people, and a little bit of money. But if you look at that, if that's what you judge the success of a drug roundup on, you might be a little disappointed in what you see in Sandy Bottom. But if you judge the success of a drug roundup by the number of people that they got, and then the number of guilty pleas or convictions that come out of that operation, you will be extremely happy with Sandy Bottom. Because again, I can't think of anybody who was charged in Sandy Bottom who did not plead guilty. I guess probably the closest thing we have to somebody getting off, was someone in a situation like Mr. Young here, like Richard Young. He pled guilty, but he got credit for time served, been in jail for, close to 3 years, 2.5 years. He got credit for time served and was released. But he still got the felony conviction on his record. So, we got close to 50 people, I think 47, 48 people, and almost all of them have pleaded guilty. All of them I can think of have pleaded guilty. So that's a significant number of drug traffickers, people involved in the illegal drug trade who are off the streets. Again, not a lot of drugs, but a lot of people. And if you can get rid of the people, you're going to get rid of the drugs. If you round up a lot of drugs, but you don't get a lot of people, you still have the organization in place. And a lot of this stuff is methamphetamine and, drugs like that are pretty easy to move in and out. They're not that difficult to get into a community. So, again, a lot of people, not a lot of drugs, but a very successful operation. That's one thing I would like for people to realize and understand moving forward is I think the true litmus test with regard to the success of operations like this is how many people do we get? Let's get the dealers off the streets, and not just the street level dealers. Let's get the folks who are controlling the supply. And Sandy Bottom did that. So that's been a very, very successful operation. But these 6 defendants were not the only ones in federal court last week. The feds also sentenced Clarence Eugene Barr, 33 years old of Broxton, to 150 months, which is 12.5 years, in prison after he pled guilty to distribution of child pornography. So again, no no parole in the federal system. He will serve every day of this 12 and a half years. And once he gets out, he'll have to register as a sex offender and serve 10 years of supervised release. Now, the main part of this case and of these charges was sharing images, child pornography images. It was not child molestation, and it's still bad. And I'm not trying to make it less than what it is. But I saw in the comments that people made, a lot of folks were saying that it was the same thing. And you're exploiting children, and it has serious ramifications. It's bad all the way around, but it's not the same thing as child molestation. And even within child molestation cases, I don't like talking about this. I feel dirty just talking about it. But even within child molestation cases, there are varying degrees depending on what actually takes place. Okay. And, practically speaking, there may not be a lot of difference, but in the eyes of the law, there is. So people were questioning the sentence. People were questioning, why it wasn't tougher, and making blanket statements. And you really, it doesn't seem right, but you really can't do that in this particular case, or in cases like this, because it's not the same thing. It's just not. Sharing images and actually having inappropriate physical contact to varying degree or another with a child are two different things. Now, at some point, somebody exploited the child who was in the pictures, right? But that's not what happened in this case. But I would still say, 33 years old, 12 and a half years, basically 13 years, you're looking at getting out of prison when you're, 45, 46 years old. And then you've got 10 years of supervised release. So, you're looking at probably, really for the next 20 years, you're in some kind of confinement, under some kind of supervision, having people watching your every move. And then, registering as a sex offender is another layer to that as well. So all in all, that's a pretty tough sentence that's going to tie up Mr. Barr for most of the rest of his life. But that was an ongoing investigation. And again, guilty plea in federal court. One more of our local folks in federal, not really local, but close. And I'll explain what I mean by that. James Lamont Graham, 49 years old, of a Telfair County address, was a supplier to a Telfair County drug ring that spilled over into Coffee County. All right. There were some tentacles of this drug operation in Telfair County that crossed the river and came over into Coffee County. He was sentenced to 170 months in prison, and mainly and the charges all related to distributing methamphetamine and other illegal drugs in Southeast Georgia. Once again, no parole in the federal system. He will serve every day of those 170 months. That's over 14 years in prison. So you're looking at 49 years old, 14 years. You're looking at being around, early 60s before you get out of prison. And then there are also some fines and other things tacked on to that as well. So hopefully, Mr. Graham, when he gets released, will have learned his lesson. And Lord, 14 and a half years from now, however long, over 14 years from now, there's no telling what the drug trade will be like. I mean, there will certainly be a drug trade. There always has been and always will be. But who knows what will be out there, and how and how the drug traffickers will ply their trade. Okay. I mean, technology already affects the drug trade. So how will it affect it 14 years from now? But Mr. Graham will not see the developments of that until he gets out. So those were pretty significant stories related to crime and punishment that took place in Coffee County and in surrounding areas. Again, Mr. Graham was actually sentenced because of a Telfair County operation, but he had been a target by Coffee County authorities, and his network, his operation extended into Coffee County and more than likely other counties around Telfair County as well. But a lot of comments about these particular cases, a lot of feedback on our Facebook page. And if you would like to know what the court of public opinion is regarding these cases, go over there to the Facebook page and check it out. Now, I talked about this in another video that I did. This next topic, I'm going to mention it again because I think it's extremely important. And I think it's something that people need to understand. And I wish we could get more people excited about these kinds of things, but for whatever reason, budgets and money and the day-to-day operations of our cities and counties and school boards don't attract the same amount of attention as things like employment and that kind of thing. Usually what gets most people worked up with regard to our government institutions or regarding employment and personnel. Again, budgets, not so much, but the budget is the most important part, because without a budget, you can't have a city government. You can't have a county government. You can't have a school board. You've got to have a budget, and the budget, the FY23 budget, because that will be in the beginning July 1, will be in the 2022-2023 fiscal year. The budget is $104 million. And I made a comment in the other video that I did that the last time I remember hearing a specific budget number, because we haven't always done a good job of covering the budget, but the last budget number I remember hearing many, many years ago was around $48 million. And this is for a little municipality the size of Douglas, 40 something thousand people. It's over $100 million, $104 million. And the city provides a lot of services. And one thing I'm not sure that everybody understands or everybody realizes is just how much these services cost. And we can reduce the budget, we can reduce taxes, but we're going to have to reduce services. Now, there are a couple of services that we can't cut. You can't cut police, you can't cut fire. And there's a lot of money that goes into those organizations or those agencies. Outside of that, you've got parks and recreation. And then, of course, you have utilities, water, sewer, electricity, that kind of thing. You certainly can't cut that out. But, you're looking at police, fire, and parks and recreation. So if you want to start reducing, that's where you're going to have to cut. And you can't cut police. You can't cut fire. You don't need to cut parks and recreation. If you do that, then you're going to take the money that you saved in parks and recreation. You're going to have to put it right back into the police department, because when young people don't have things to do, they're going to get into trouble. That's how the budget swells to $104 million. Now, out of that $104 million, we got $27 million in various capital projects. And a lot of those capital projects, some of those are going to be funded through One Georgia grants, through SPLOST monies and things like that. Among those capital projects, we don't have this in writing yet, but Unity Park is supposed to be scheduled for some improvements this coming fiscal year. Also going to get started on the Greenway Trail, which is the trails, the walking trail through Douglas. Currently stands at a little over 5 miles. That's if you go from the north end to the south end or vice versa. You go from one end to the other and turn around and go back. It's a little over 5 miles. The idea, the ultimate goal, is to take that trail and extend it out to Coffee High School. All right, go through Douglas, through the Shop Pond area, and then go out to Coffee High. The idea, when Douglas Square was a school, you connected the south end of the Board of Education properties to the northernmost Board of Education properties, that being Coffee High School. Now, they've done a little bit of work and closed off that southern end of the Greenway Trail since they built Douglas Square. So you can't really access it very well from the shopping center. You either have to access it from South Georgia State College or from other areas along the trail. In fact, a lot of people go to the north end around Chester Avenue, and that's where they begin getting on the trail. But nonetheless, starting this year and finishing it up in the 2024 fiscal year, they're going to have that trail finished. It's going to include a bridge over the railroad tracks. Right now, depending upon where you're headed, north or south, as to whether you go right or left, if you follow the exact path of the trail, when you get to the railroad tracks, you have to deviate and go around the trail, cross the railroad tracks where they're crossing arms, and then get back on the trail and continue on your way north or south. Now, if you look at how the trail actually gets utilized, you can see that most people typically don't do that. They just go straight. There's grassy areas on either side of the railroad tracks, and you can see where people walk through there, and if you look both ways, it's not, it's not particularly dangerous. But what always scares me is people paying attention to their phones, people with headphones on or with earbuds in are not going to be paying attention to the trains. And because there are no crossing arms there, the trains aren't necessarily going to be blowing the horn. Now, you should be able to hear it for whichever side the trains come in, east or west, they'll be blowing the horns. You should be able to hear it. But all of us know that people don't pay attention the way that they're supposed to. So that's always made me nervous. And whenever I use the trail, I always zigzag around the block and cross where there are crossing arms. It just seems to be safer that way. But we're going to have a bridge over the railroad tracks. You think about that. It's going to be a tall bridge, and it's going to have to start pretty far back on either end, so it's not so steep. But that will be a part, or is supposed to be a part of that project. But I'm gonna tell you, the trail's nice. If you've never gotten out there on it, the trail is really nice. We've used it a lot over the years, and being able to go from one end to the other, 10-mile round trip. If you're a runner, or you like to walk and get out and do some distance, that's going to be nice. It's going to be nice to be able to run 10 miles or so, and you can make it as long or short as you want to using that base route. It's going to be nice to be able to get off the road, because I'm going to tell you, it's a little bit nervous sharing the road with cars these days. You're not supposed to be texting, but people do, and they pay attention to their phones quite a bit. And it always makes me nervous. But that's going to be a portion of that $27 million. And also Central Square Complex, the gym's there scheduled for some renovations as well. And I always tell people this, that's kind of the devil in the details when you take SPLOST money and build buildings with it and do parks and capital projects of any kind, because you can't maintain those buildings with SPLOST funds. All right. You can build them with SPLOST funds. And I know a lot of government officials like to say that SPLOST money is free money because everybody pays the penny or whatever it is. People from out of town help finance our projects in town, and that is true. But of course, there's no such thing as free money. And then you turn around and you look, if you build something like Central Square, then you come back 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, at whatever interval you need to, and you have to renovate those buildings, because eventually you're going to have to redo floors, you're going to have to redo air conditioners, roofs, that kind of stuff costs a lot of money. And particularly when you're dealing with a basketball court, you've also got lights and buzzers and scoreboards, and you've got to make sure the ball bounces right off of the floor. So the floor's got to be true. A lot of stuff goes into it. All right. A lot of stuff goes into it. So, what I always tell people, and I usually vote, I don't think I've ever voted against a SPLOST. I think I've ever voted against a SPLOST, but I do so with that in the back of my mind, that whatever we're paying for, whatever buildings or facilities that we're constructing as a result of the SPLOST project, just know that at some point down the road, it's going to cost money out of the general fund, out of our budget, our the tax dollars that we pay, property taxes and what have you, to maintain and renovate that. It's another reason you got to be careful with whatever you buy. It's going to have to be renovated and going to have to be maintained. One of the reasons why I haven't bought a Tesla yet. I actually like Teslas a lot, but just as an aside, people haven't had Teslas yet long enough for them to tear up, and you don't know exactly how much it's going to cost. But I can tell you, just based on what little bit I've read and little bit I've seen from people who have had problems with them, Teslas are stupid expensive to work on. And I am too broke and too poor to jump into that pool unless I know I can afford to fix it. And so I'm scared of that a little bit, but just a little rabbit I thought we would chase for a second. But keep that in mind with regard to buildings and capital projects. You're going to have to maintain those. And air conditioners are expensive, roofs are expensive, floors are expensive. Another interesting thing that came out of the budget meeting earlier this week, $12 million in water and sewer projects. All right. Now, we've talked about that quite a bit in different forums and different areas, is what the city's going to have to pay in terms of infrastructure with water, sewer, electricity. We didn't really touch that in the budget. Didn't hear a lot of discussions about electricity, that part of the utilities department. But we're close to maxed out right now with our utilities capacity. And when I say utilities, I mean everything. Again, water, sewer, electricity, natural gas, all that. We've got a new Pilgrim's Pride plant that's going to be built in the next year. We're going to have Publix. We're going to have other shopping centers. We've been talking about this, not really getting specific about what's coming, except to say that there are some more shopping centers, some more retail centers scheduled for the southern end of town, down there around, where the Douglas Square is, where Walmart is, the new Woody Folsom dealership. That's going to be a very, very busy place. There's some vacant lots down there that aren't going to be vacant much longer. Each time we build a facility, we build a shopping center, we build a store, we build a manufacturing facility, we put a burden on our utilities. And right now, as capacity stands, we need about $100 million in improvements with water, sewer, natural gas, and electricity. So that's not going down, right? So $12 million is 10 or 12%, of what we actually need. So we're going to see the budget grow in that area moving forward. So remember, progress comes with a price, and I'm not saying that progress is bad at all. It creates, what progress does is it creates problems, but it also creates opportunities. And at the end of the day, of course, we're all going to be better off because of it. But these are things that we need to think about. These are questions that our elected officials need to be ready to answer, and hopefully that our citizens will ask. And early voting is still going on. By the time this airs, you'll have about a day and a half to go vote if you have it. If you don't vote during early voting, you can go on Tuesday and vote from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. at your regular precinct. But what I hope people will do is, we've got a city election on the ballot, a special election, and let's ask our candidates serious questions that they need to be thinking about and need to be considering as we move forward, because the next few years, I think, are going to be pivotal in Douglas. You ride around, you can see our city looks different now than it used to, and it's going to look a lot different moving forward, particularly when we get 32 four-laned outside of town. We've got several other paving projects underway. You ride around and Douglas looks a lot different. Sometimes when we make improvements, they're not readily visible. You kind of have to look a little bit, and some of this stuff, particularly water and sewer improvements, you don't really see. All right. And that's something too, that's can be hard to sell, because when you have a functioning, a properly functioning water department, sewer department, electricity department, natural gas department, you shouldn't see anything. Okay. Particularly with regard to the sewer department. If you can see that, you're in a lot of trouble. But you look around and see the buildings that we've made and the capital improvements that we've made. And I've said this before, I'll say it again. In the short time that I've been alive, I haven't seen quite as many improvements take place at one time that significantly alter our landscape. If you haven't been to Douglas in 3-4 years, 2 years, even 5 years, pick a time and you come to Douglas Now, you're going to be amazed at what you see. You really will. Looks a lot different, and it's going to get even better. But with that progress comes challenges that need to be met. So that's where the budget is swelling, and then when you have to deal with these, you also have the inflation we're all dealing with. I feel bad for the city trying to plan for projects moving forward, because in 6 months' time, you can see prices in fuel and labor skyrocket. So that's something that citizens are going to have to keep in mind as well as we move forward. And speaking of projects, within the next month or so, hopefully City Hall will be finished and the old Davis Wade Park project will be finished with the Miracle Field and the city pool. So that's going to be pretty big to get those projects finished and maybe return to a little bit of normalcy for the city. One last thing I want to mention: the day that we are filming this and taping this, there have been some pretty significant developments in the Tara Grinstead murder trial over in Irwin County. A lot of people locally are following that. Ryan Duke, who is accused of killing Tara, who confessed to killing Tara, took the stand on this particular day, which is Tuesday. Ryan admitted to helping destroy Tara's body, but on the stand, he said that Bo killed Tara, Bo Dukes killed Tara, and he went with Bo to the pecan orchard, and he showed her her body. Now the state has the confession. The state has Ryan's confession, and it's going to be difficult to get around that. However, um, uh, during Ryan's testimony, which is still ongoing under cross-examination at the time that we're taping this, Ryan has been remarkably composed, remarkably calm, and remarkably collected and confident under cross-examination. He's handled himself very well. And at the end of the day, I think it's going to be difficult for the state to prove anything outside of the confession. And I realize how silly that sounds when I say that, because confessions usually carry a lot of weight. But what the defense is going to do is to try to show that that was a false confession. And there's a lot of science in false confessions. There's a lot of different twists and turns that you can take when you discuss false confessions. Some of it makes sense, some of it doesn't. But there have been times when defense attorneys have been able to prove false confessions in other cases, and that's what they're going to try to do in this one. But basically, the way the trial is set up, I mean, this is what it's based on, is that Ryan killed Tara and got Bo to help him destroy her body, when actually what Ryan is saying now is that Bo's the one who actually killed Tara, and he helped Bo destroy the body. So going to be interesting to see how well the jury believes those two arguments. I know that I have been very impressed with what I've seen in the trial so far. I've been very impressed with Ryan's testimony, and he's either telling the truth or he's been prepped very well, and he's very confident in the statements that he's making. So, and it might even be such that by the time this airs, there could be a verdict, right? Because we're going to do this on Tuesday and air it later in the week. My guess is we probably won't have a verdict yet, but we could. And regardless of when the verdict comes in, we'll talk about it on our next edition of Beyond the Front Page. But that's a pretty big story that's taking place right now. Sort of the center of the crime universe in Georgia is over in Ocilla in Irwin County. A lot of people all over the state are following that case, but that's the biggest development there. The state rested its case on Monday, and then the defense picked it up, and they went ahead and swung for the fences. They called Ryan first. So that's some pretty explosive testimony. We're going to follow that a little more closely and have more of an update and more of a wrap up on our next edition. But that's pretty big. That's pretty big. And if you haven't paid attention to the Grinstead trial, you'll want to moving forward if it is still ongoing at the time that this airs. But really, that's kind of been what we've been talking about at the newsroom the first part of the week, is the Grinstead case. That's all we've got here today. I want to thank everybody for watching. As always, please send us feedback on what you think. Let us know any topics that you would like for us to discuss. We're planning some things out for the rest of the summer. Once we get a little farther into this, we're gonna talk about some of our local unsolved cases. We're gonna bring guests in, and so you won't have to sit here and look and listen at me for the duration of Beyond the Front Page. And I think that will benefit everybody. So we're going to continue to work on this, expand it, and make it bigger and better as we move forward. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you're having a wonderful week. We'll see you next time.